Everyone said I'd changed. I was no longer arrogant and overbearing. I no longer begged my parents for love, and I no longer chased after my husband, Barry, like my life depended on it. Poverty had taught me something brutal: love, by itself, was worth less than nothing when the people holding it over your head never meant to give it to you. But the moment I finally became the quiet, obedient version of myself they'd always wanted, the moment I stopped fighting for anything, they all seemed to lose their minds. It was in the dead of night when Barry brought Scarlet home again. I didn't make a scene. I didn't even sigh. I just forced my aching body out of bed and walked toward the guest room, moving like a ghost through the hallway. As I passed her, Scarlet's fingers shot out and closed around my wrist. Her voice was syrupy and sweet in a way that made my skin crawl. "Arya, you've got it all wrong," she said, blinking innocently. "I only came to pick up the necklace I left here last time. I'm not trying to steal your husband." Barry's brows drew together. I could already see it, him gearing up to snap at me the way he always did. Jealous. Paranoid. Irrational. But for once, I spoke first. My voice came out calm, flat, almost detached, like still water. "I know I was never supposed to be here in the first place. No bitterness. No drama. Just the truth. He was always yours to begin with. Let's not pretend otherwise. I'd figured it out long ago. Marriages in wealthy families weren't built on love. They were built on status, on what your name could buy, on what your background could hide. The second my identity as the fake heiress came to light, Barry filed for divorce like he was taking out the trash. Back then, I crumbled. I cried and begged. I'd stopped eating for days at a time. I'd said desperate things I can't even stand to remember now, just to cling to the hollow title of Mrs. Miller like it meant safety. What did it get me? My parents took back everything they'd ever given me. The Millers cut me off without a penny. Overnight, I went from princess to invisible. Scarlet clearly hadn't expected my response. She froze for a heartbeat, then smiled again, her tone dripping with fake concern. "Good," she said. "I was worried you'd mind that I'm working as Barry's personal assistant at his company." She knew exactly where to press. She knew what it would feel like, her in his orbit, her close enough to touch everything that used to be mine. I saw the triumph glitter in her eyes. I just nodded. "That's great," I said indifferently. "Once you get the hang of it, you can take over the whole company. Your father, Mr. Hayes, would be thrilled, wouldn't he?" Then I tugged my hand free like she'd grabbed the sleeve of a stranger. "Sorry," I added, already turning away. "I've been delivering food all day. I'm exhausted. I'm going to lie down. You two carry on." The guest room door clicked shut behind me. I sank onto the bed and shut my eyes, drained in a way that went deeper than muscle and bone. My chest felt hollow, like something inside me had been carved out and left open to the cold. I was drifting toward sleep when the door suddenly slammed open with a loud bang. Barry stood in the doorway, his face dark and sharp with anger. "What game are you playing now?" he demanded. "A game." I almost laughed. Over the past year, I'd been blacklisted from every decent industry. I'd delivered packages, ridden my scooter for food orders, and streamed online just to scrape together enough for rent. There was nothing soft or spoiled left in me. Whatever pride I'd once carried had been ground down into dust. And yet he still looked at me like I was a weapon. For the first time in my life, he rushed to explain himself, as if he needed me to believe him. "Scarlet felt dizzy last time," he said. "That's why I helped her lie down. She must have dropped her necklace then. And her being my assistant was my dad's idea. She's only there to learn. Don't overthink it." I kept my eyes closed and let out a quiet hum. He stood by the bed in silence, as if waiting for an explosion that never came. Just when I thought he'd finally leave, his voice came again, lower, tighter. "My dad's birthday is in 2 days. The banquet's this weekend." A pause. "Don't embarrass Scarlet at the party. If you do, you'll lose the Mrs. Miller title for good." I exhaled slowly, my mind already doing the math, how many deliveries I'd have to make tomorrow to afford a gift that wouldn't get thrown in my face. I was so tired I could barely put words together. "Got it," I said. I scraped together enough money just before the mall closed, rushed in, and bought what I could afford. When I arrived at the hotel banquet hall, every face turned sour the second they saw me. Scarlet was the first to laugh, loud enough to make sure everyone heard. "Arya, seriously?" she said, eyes sweeping me from head to toe. "You showed up in your delivery uniform? There are so many people here. Couldn't you at least try to save Barry some face?" I glanced down at myself, heat flooding my cheeks. In my rush, I'd forgotten to change. It felt like being slapped in front of a crowd. My hands were red and raw from the cold, fingers stiff from gripping handlebars and food bags all day. I walked to the table anyway, set the gift down carefully like it was something fragile, and bowed my head. "Dad," I said softly. "I'm sorry I'm late. Something came up. This is just a small token. I wish you good health and a long, happy life." Mr. Miller's expression didn't soften in the slightest. Mrs. Miller picked up the gift, flipped open the box, took one look, and tossed it aside like it was trash. "If you really cared about his birthday," she said coldly, "you'd agree to divorce Barry. Bringing this cheap junk here. How humiliating." Her lip curled. "You're a disgrace to the Miller name." Something heavy crashed into my chest, like I'd swallowed a stone. My father, my real father, the man who had once held my hand and called me his little girl, slammed his fist on the table, face flushed with rage. "She's not our blood after all," he snapped. "You can take the girl out of the gutter, but you can't take the gutter out of the girl." He looked around at the guests, as if performing his disgust. When my wife gave birth, the hospital mixed up the babies. Poor Scarlet suffered for 25 years before coming home, and Barry had already married someone else. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, sniffing as if she were the wronged one. "And the worst part," she said, voice trembling theatrically, "is that this imposter has no remorse at all. She stole Scarlet's life and still refuses to leave." I lifted my head and looked at them. The parents who had once doted on me now stared like I was something rotten. Barry's parents watched with faces twisted in contempt. It was all so absurd it almost didn't feel real. The cold had cracked my skin, my hands itched and burned at the same time. I wanted to tell them how I'd worked from dawn to dusk to afford that gift. How I'd nearly wiped out on my scooter more than once trying to get there on time. But I didn't. In the end, I only opened my mouth, then closed it again. I turned and walked away. I forced myself to keep moving even as my legs wobbled beneath me. Then I heard Barry's voice behind me, soft but clear. "Dad," he said, "that vintage fountain pen. It's actually a really nice gift." I froze. Confused. Off balance. Why was he speaking up now? For a split second, a ridiculous spark of hope flickered in my chest, small, bright, and stupid. I slowed, straining to catch what would come next. But all I heard was my father-in-law's icy reply. "Throw it away." A sharp clink followed, the sound of the pen hitting the floor. And just like that, the spark went out. That night, I rode my scooter through the streets as fast as it would take me. The wind cut into my face, stealing my breath, tearing at my eyes so hard my tears couldn't even fall properly. That was when I finally understood something I'd refused to accept for too long. You can die slowly from the inside out while still walking around with your eyes open. When I dragged myself home, numb to the bone, Barry was already there. I crept inside, hoping to disappear into the guest room without disturbing anyone. But Scarlet leaned out of the bedroom doorway, smiling like she'd been waiting for me. "You're back," she said brightly. "I figured you must have skipped dinner after storming out like that, so I saved you some leftovers from the banquet." Then she covered her mouth as if she'd made a mistake. "Oh, sorry. I forgot. You never used to eat leftovers." Her eyes gleamed. "Unlike me," she added softly, "I was taken when I was little. I went hungry. Most days I would have been grateful for scraps." Every word was a needle dressed up as a confession. A reminder. You stole my life? You deserve this. Once, I would have argued until my throat went raw. I would have sworn I was innocent too, that years of family love had to mean something. But I knew better now. They never loved me. Not my parents. Not the Millers. And Barry. Not him either. I stood in the hallway and thanked her politely. "It's a shame to waste food," I said evenly. "Put it in the fridge. I'll heat it up tomorrow." Scarlet's jaw actually dropped. She stared at me like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. I turned away before she could recover. In the guest room, I pulled cotton swabs and rubbing alcohol from the drawer. My leg ached, an ugly scrape from earlier, still bleeding a little under the fabric. I rolled up my pant leg carefully and started cleaning it, wincing at the sting. The door opened behind me. Barry walked in. I tensed instantly, bracing for another lecture, another accusation. I blurted out the apology before he could speak. "I'm sorry I forgot to change today." But instead of scolding me, he stepped closer, took the cotton swab from my hand, and began cleaning the wound himself. I froze. There had been a time I would have given anything for his attention, anything for him to look at me like I mattered. Now his touch made my muscles go tight, like my body didn't trust him anymore. "Does it hurt?" he asked. I blinked, about to shake my head, but he answered for me, voice unexpectedly soft. "Of course it does. You used to get upset over a tiny paper cut." I stared at him, completely lost. I had no idea what he was doing. He met my eyes, holding the look longer than he ever used to. "I had a few drinks at the banquet," he said. "Scarlet drove me home. There's nothing between us." I gently pulled my leg back and rolled my pant leg down, nodding as if it meant nothing. "She's your assistant," I said. "It's normal to have work contact." Something in his gaze shifted, complicated and unreadable, like he was trying to find a crack in me and couldn't. I didn't have the energy to figure him out. I didn't even want to. After a long moment, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a black card, and set it on my nightstand. "Quit those side jobs," he said. "I'll transfer your monthly living expenses to this card from now on." Then, as if that weren't strange enough, he added, "And don't eat leftovers anymore." He paused, just long enough for my heart to trip over itself. And then he said something that made my breath catch, leaving me completely stunned. I didn't answer right away, because I was terrified of what answering would cost me. That was the part nobody understood about being discarded by a rich family. It wasn't just humiliation. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was fear. Real, bone-deep fear, of what happens to you when the money stops, when the doors close, when you're standing on a sidewalk at midnight with nowhere to go and no one willing to claim you. My father had warned me the first night the truth came out. His voice had been calm, like he was discussing the weather. "Other girls can divorce and go home," he'd said. "You? If you divorce, what do you have left?" I'd laughed back then, like a fool. Because I still thought love was a safety net. I still thought being Mrs. Miller meant something. Like a ring could protect you from the world. So when Barry slid that black card onto my nightstand like a leash disguised as a gift, I forced myself to swallow whatever feelings tried to rise. I nodded. "Okay," I said softly. And in the dark, with his eyes on me, I did what I'd learned to do best. I acted grateful. He stared for a beat, like he'd expected me to argue. To cry. To demand answers. To beg. When I didn't, something tight shifted in his jaw. He left. And the second the door clicked shut, I picked up the card with hands that didn't even tremble anymore. Not because I was calm. Because I'd gone numb. The next morning, Barry left early like always. On the kitchen table, he'd left a note, 3 neat lines in the same sharp handwriting that signed contracts worth more than my entire childhood. "Eat breakfast. Don't skip your medicine. Text me when you wake up." It would have made me cry before. Back when I was still the kind of woman who thought tenderness meant commitment. I stared at the note for a long time, then folded it neatly and put it in the trash. My heart condition had been the only reason anyone hesitated to marry me back when everyone still believed I was a real heiress. The Millers hadn't hesitated. Barry hadn't hesitated. He pushed through rumors and his parents' cold resistance and married me with a wedding so lavish people called it romantic. Then, right after the vows, he'd put the best doctors in the country on my case. He'd sat beside my hospital bed through the transplant. He'd held my hand like a man who was terrified of losing me. Sometimes, late at night, I'd replay those memories like a movie and wonder if I'd imagined them. If they'd ever been real. Or if they'd just been part of the deal. Because 5 years later, the man who once moved mountains to keep me alive was now using my existence as a bargaining chip. Don't embarrass Scarlet. Don't make trouble. Don't eat leftovers. Don't work. Don't move without my permission. That was the love I'd earned. That afternoon, I washed Barry's coat like I always did, habit, autopilot, muscle memory. As I lifted it from the sofa, something heavy slipped from the inner pocket and clattered onto the floor. A small box. A blister pack. I stared for half a second too long. Not jewelry. Not mints. Medication. The kind of medication you don't casually forget in someone else's pocket. I didn't pick it up. I didn't gasp. I didn't even let my face change. I simply bent down, scooped it up like it was nothing, and held it out. "You dropped something," I said lightly. "You should pick it up. I'm going to start the wash." My wrist was seized before I could take 2 steps. Barry's grip was strong, too strong. I looked back, and he was towering over me, eyes sharp, lashes casting shadows that made him look carved out of stone. For a moment, that old instinct flared, panic. Shame. That reflexive urge to explain myself before I was accused of something. Then I remembered. Explaining never saved me. He exhaled hard, and for the first time in a long time, his face looked tired. Not irritated, tired. Worn down. That isn't what you think, he said. I blinked slowly. I didn't say anything. His eyes narrowed, like that answer didn't fit his script. It's Scarlet's, he said anyway, voice clipped. Doctor prescribed it. Hormone regulation. Stress. She's been pushing herself too hard on this project. I nodded once, like I believed him. Because whether I believed him or not didn't matter. I was learning a different kind of survival. Barry studied my face, waiting for the familiar fight. When it didn't come, he looked almost unsettled. If you don't believe me, he added, pulling his phone from his pocket, I can ask her for the paperwork. I smiled, small and polite, the smile of a woman who has learned how to disappear. No, I said gently. It's fine. It's not worth bothering her over something like this. His expression froze. His voice dropped. Then what were you thinking just now? I knew what he wanted to hear. You were thinking, I'm sorry. You were thinking, please don't leave me. You were thinking, how do I keep you? Instead, I gave him the truth, just wrapped in soft fabric so it wouldn't cut him. I was thinking you should get it back to her, I said. If it's part of treatment, you don't want to delay it. His fingers loosened around my wrist like he'd been burned. I slipped free and walked away before my composure could crack. In the laundry room, with the washer rumbling like distant thunder, I pressed my palm to the counter and let my breath out slowly. That had been close. Not because I'd almost cried. Because I'd almost laughed. The irony was almost unbearable. He could carry Scarlet's pills in his pocket and claim it was for her health, but if I so much as forgot to answer a text fast enough, I was accused of disrespect. That night, he climbed into bed behind me. He wrapped an arm around my waist, his breath warm against the back of my neck. 5 years, he murmured. Our anniversary's coming. I'll take you somewhere. Somewhere you've always wanted to go. My body went rigid. He didn't notice. Or he pretended not to. There's a nice hotel in the south, he continued, voice low like a promise. Or, Antarctica. You always talked about the lights. The aurora. You said kissing under it was romantic. I stared into the darkness, eyes wide open. Last year, on our anniversary, he'd promised me something too. Then Scarlet had called, and he'd left, and I'd spent the night alone at a table set for two. I swallowed. We'll see, I whispered. His hand tightened around my waist. Why? He asked, and there was something sharp under the softness now. You used to want that more than anything. I kept my voice light, careful. Didn't you always say not to waste time on useless things? I said. And it's still a few days away. We can talk later. I'm tired. I closed my eyes and breathed like I was sleeping. In my head, I was doing math. Because the truth was, I'd already seen the aurora. The night I found out I was a fake, I'd booked the trip like a woman spending her last coins before a shipwreck. $30,000 for a once-in-a-lifetime experience, because I knew I might never afford it again. I'd stood under that green, dancing sky alone. And I cried so silently my tears froze on my cheeks. Love didn't deserve Antarctica. Love didn't deserve anything from me anymore. Money did. Safety did. An escape plan did. Over the next few weeks, I became what Barry called good. I stopped asking questions. I stopped checking his phone. When he came home with perfume on his collar, I pretended not to smell it. When Scarlet texted him at midnight and he stepped into the hallway to take the call, I didn't follow. When I found a lipstick smear on a glass in the sink, I washed it without staring at it too long. Barry watched me like a man waiting for a trapdoor to open. And when nothing happened, he started to unravel in quiet ways. He began asking where I'd been. At first it was casual. Then it wasn't. One afternoon, I walked in after my class, and he was sitting on the couch like he'd been waiting. His suit jacket was still on. His tie was loosened. His eyes were dark. Where did you go today? He asked. I paused, genuinely confused. You never asked me that before. His jaw clenched. Answer. I took a class, I said, keeping my tone mild. Translation. Online certification. He stared, like the words offended him. For what? He asked. So I could feed myself when you finally throw me away. So I won't end up in an alley again. So I won't have to call you and hear another woman answer your phone. I smiled instead. For fun, I lied. He didn't look satisfied. That night, he came to bed later than usual. I felt the mattress dip. I felt him behind me. And then I felt the way his mood filled the room, restless, tense, searching. He spoke into the dark. I heard someone sent you another picture. I kept my eyes closed. MHM. A picture of me and Scarlet, he said, voice flat. At dinner. MHM, I repeated. Silence. Then, lower. You're not going to ask? My head throbbed with exhaustion. I was packing in my mind, papers, clothes, documents, the cash I'd hidden in a book sleeve, the receipts from the pawn shop. What's there to ask? I murmured. You said it's work. His breathing shifted. A second later, the bed moved and his hand closed around my hip like a clamp. Arya. I opened my eyes, heart suddenly too awake. He pulled me closer, not gently. Not lovingly. With the same kind of force he used when he wanted something to stay where he put it. Did you hear what you just said? He asked. I swallowed. Barry, I'm tired. His voice went quieter, almost dangerous in its calm. I asked you a question. I stared at the wall, trying to keep my voice steady. I said I believe you, I answered. And there's nothing to ask. He let out a short laugh that held no humor. Liar. And then he did what he always did when he couldn't control my mind. He tried to control my body. I won't describe it. I don't need to. Because the worst part wasn't the roughness or the insistence. It was what happened inside me. How my thoughts drifted away like smoke. How I stared at the ceiling and counted seconds, not kisses. How I felt myself become a place he could reach, but not a person he could hold. When he finally stopped, he leaned over me, breathing hard, eyes searching my face like he was desperate to find proof of something. Anything. Why don't you care? He asked hoarsely. I blinked slowly. Because caring nearly killed me. Because caring had left me starving on the street. Because caring had made me beg people who enjoyed watching me bleed. But I didn't say any of that. I just turned my face into the pillow and whispered, good night. The next morning, my visa approval email came through. Approved. Departure in 3 days. I stared at the screen so long my eyes burned. Then I quietly locked my phone, went to the bathroom, and smiled at my reflection like a woman who was about to be reborn. Barry didn't know. He didn't suspect. Because to him, I was still his. Even when he wasn't sure what to do with me anymore. That afternoon, he called. Come to the office, he said. It's our anniversary. Wait for me downstairs. I glanced at the calendar hanging by the kitchen window. 5 years? I'd forgotten. Not because it didn't matter. Because nothing mattered anymore except the exit. Okay, I said, and my voice didn't even change. When I arrived at the lobby, I didn't go upstairs. I sat on the couch and waited, scrolling through my phone like I had all the time in the world. The receptionist glanced at me, uncertain. I recognized her. She'd been the one who stopped me last time. No appointment, Mrs. Miller. I can't let you up. Around me, employees passed with coffees and laptops and whispered conversations. 2 women walked by slowly, their badges swinging. One of them, I remembered her face. The one who'd looked at me like I was inconvenient. She leaned toward her friend and spoke just loud enough to be heard. Did you hear? She said. He lost it today. Who? Mr. Miller, she whispered. Then she glanced at me quickly, like checking whether I was listening. Scarlet walked into his office without knocking. He threw her out. Her friend's eyes widened. No way. I'm serious, the first woman continued, voice hushed with excitement. He said only his wife is allowed to walk into his office like that. He told Scarlet if she does it again, she can pack her desk. They both looked at me again, almost in sync. I didn't even lift my head. I just kept scrolling, thumb moving lazily. Inside my chest, there was no flutter. No relief. No satisfaction. A year ago, I would have clung to that like proof he still cared. Now it sounded like theater. And I was too tired to applaud. A few minutes later, Barry appeared at the elevator. His face was tight, his eyes darker than usual. He walked straight toward me, gaze dropping to my phone screen. I'd been playing a stupid little game, something mindless with bright colors and fake rewards. His mouth hardened. You're here, He said. Why didn't you come up? I lifted my eyes calmly. I didn't have an appointment. For a split second, he looked like he hadn't heard me right. Then his anger sparked, quick, sharp. You're my wife, he snapped. What appointment? I tilted my head slightly. Last time I came, they said I couldn't go up without one, I said evenly. They said it was your rule. Barry's head whipped toward the desk. His hands curled into fists. I stood up before he could explode at someone who didn't deserve it. It's not her fault, I said quietly, stepping into his line of sight. She's an employee. She follows orders. His expression flickered, conflict, frustration, something almost like shame. Arya. He started, then stopped like he didn't know what words to use. I didn't help him. I didn't need closure. I needed distance. He reached for my hand anyway and pulled me toward the elevator. His office was exactly what I imagined: glass, steel, sharp corners, everything expensive in a way that felt cold. He shut the door behind us and turned. Then his eyes dropped to my empty hands. His voice went careful. Where's my gift? I blinked. Oh. Right. I'd brought his father a pen even when I was bleeding from the cold. And I'd forgotten my own husband's anniversary. I forgot, I admitted, and even that sounded more like a weather report than an apology. I can get it later. His face tightened like he'd been slapped. Forgot? He echoed, incredulous. This is important. You forgot? I stared back at him, calm enough to scare even myself. It didn't feel important, I said. He looked like he wanted to say something harsh, something cutting. But the door burst open before he could. Scarlet swept in, cheeks flushed, eyes bright with that entitled familiarity she wore like perfume. Mary, she said, voice high and sweet. You've been ignoring me all morning. I'm serious, if you don't come make it up to me, I'm going to. She stopped when she saw me. Her smile stiffened. I stood there, suddenly awkward in my own marriage. Barry's expression went blank. Then, without warning, he snatched a folder off his desk and flung it toward her. Get out, he snapped. The papers hit the floor with a slap. Scarlet froze like she couldn't believe what she'd heard. Barry's voice dropped lower, colder. I told you. Knock. Her eyes went red instantly. She looked at me like I'd stolen oxygen from her lungs. Then she spun and ran out, choking on a sob loud enough to make sure the hallway heard it. The room went quiet again. Barry's chest rose and fell. He turned back to me like he was waiting for a reaction. For gratitude. For softness. For something. I only felt tired. That night, one of the employees messaged me. It was the same woman who'd once looked nervous when I asked her to pass along my words. Mrs. Miller, please don't be mad at Mr. Miller. What we said downstairs today. He told us to say it. He really cares about you. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back. Did he tell you to send this to? A pause. Then, no. This one is me. I didn't respond after that. Because I already knew. I'd known the moment I heard the whispers. It was a performance. And I wasn't the audience anymore. The next 3 days, Barry started texting constantly. Not short commands. Long messages. Updates about meetings. A photo of a sunset outside his office window. A link to a restaurant he said we should try. A message that said, I miss you. I replied the way I used to reply when I wanted a conversation to end without looking rude. One cute sticker. A little cat face. A heart emoji. Always something small and harmless. Always something that closed the door. On the third night, I zipped my suitcase and glanced around the guest room. The room I'd slept in like a shadow. The life I'd shrunk myself into. I should have felt something. Sadness. Nostalgia. Anger. Instead, I felt a clean, sharp calm. The morning I left, I went to my parents' house. Not because I wanted their blessing. Because I wanted the debt to end. They'd raised me. And even if they'd thrown me away like trash, I wanted to look them in the eye one last time and make sure they understood something. I wasn't begging anymore. I walked down the hallway toward my father's study and stopped when I heard voices inside. My mother's, uneasy. We helped him do that, she said quietly. Wasn't it too much? A pause. Then my father's voice, cold and contemptuous. Too much? She needed to learn. She's still She's ungrateful, he cut in. Married into the Millers and still causing trouble. If Barry hadn't asked us to push her, she would have really gone through with divorce. My blood turned to ice. My mother's voice trembled. But the way she ended up out there. The way those men cornered her. That was the point, my father said, irritated. Fear keeps people obedient. She came crawling back, didn't she? I gripped the doorframe so hard my nails bit into the wood. My ears rang. So it hadn't been misfortune. It hadn't been bad luck. It had been arranged. The night I'd been disowned. My cards cut off. The way I'd been forced out with nothing. The way I'd ended up trapped in that alley, shaking, breathless, trying to escape hands and laughter and the smell of cheap beer. And then, me calling Barry, desperate enough to break my own pride. Only to hear Scarlet's voice on the other end. Arya? Hello? As if I was no one important enough to name. As if I was a wrong number. My father had left me my wedding ring on purpose. Not mercy. A reminder. A brand. See? Even now, you belong to him. You can't survive without him. I lowered my eyes to the diamond on my finger, the new ring Barry had slipped on me the day I'd sobbed and begged not to divorce. I thought it was forgiveness. I thought it was love. It was a lock. Something inside me went very still. Like the last fragile piece of hope had finally snapped clean in two. I backed away from the study door without making a sound. I walked out of the house like a stranger. In my car, I opened my phone and deleted everything. Barry's number. His assistant. His parents. My parents. Every contact tied to the life that had caged me. Not because I couldn't bear to see their names. Because I didn't want Barry to ever be able to reach me again. Not even to demand his gifts back. Not even to claw his money out of my hands. He could have power in this city. But he couldn't chase me across borders fast enough. At the airport, I checked in, passed security, and sat at the gate with my suitcase between my feet. When they called boarding, I didn't look back. On the plane, I put on an eye mask and let my head rest against the seat. For the first time in years, I slept without listening for a door opening. Back home, the civil office called Barry when the 30-day waiting period ended. They told him the divorce was finalized. At first, he didn't understand. He asked them to repeat it. Then his voice sharpened into something wild. What are you talking about? He snapped. My wife would never. She loves me. The employees sounded confused. We confirmed it with Mrs. Miller, they said. She did not withdraw. The divorce is complete. Barry dropped everything. He drove like a man who'd forgotten what consequences were. Red lights. Speed limits. His phone buzzing with missed calls from partners and executives. None of it mattered. He burst into the house, searching. The guest room. The closet. The bathroom. Every corner like the walls might hide me. When he finally found the note on the table, his hands went stiff. 30 days are over. Don't look for me. For a long time, he just stood there. Then he sank to his knees like someone had knocked the air out of him. And in the empty house, the silence swallowed him whole. He sent people to trace my trail. Tickets. Travel records. Exit stamps. And when he found out I'd left the country, he did what I'd always expected he'd do. He tried to buy a plane ticket. Until his father called. The voice on the other end was glacial. You really want to throw away everything for a woman? Mr. Miller asked. Barry didn't answer. You forget, his father continued, the only reason you have this power is because you accepted the position as heir. If you abandon it now, you'll have nothing to chase her with. Do you understand? Barry stood with the phone pressed to his ear, jaw clenched so hard it ached. In the end, he stayed. He swallowed the pain like poison and told himself it was fine. That I'd wait. That I'd calm down. That I'd come back. So he worked. Like a man trying to outrun his own fear. A project that should have taken a year, he finished in half. He barely slept. Barely ate. Barely lived. And when he finally had the freedom to leave, he flew to find me like a man arriving at the scene of a crime, certain he could still undo it. He found me. Just not the version of me he remembered. I was in a city where no one knew the Miller name. No one looked at me like a mistake. I'd started over with nothing but language and stubbornness. Translation work at first. Then better clients. Then friends, real ones, not people who smiled only when I was useful. And in that new life, I met someone who didn't treat me like property. His name was Ethan. Young. Too young, by Barry's standards. Barely out of college. He'd been sent abroad by wealthy parents who thought money could replace presence. He struggled at first, lonely and lost, his accent thick, his confidence thinner than paper. I met him outside an old brick wall behind a market. Someone had scrawled words across it in shaky handwriting. "No one wants to talk to me." I stopped because the words hit too close to home. When I spoke to him in our shared language, his eyes lit up like someone had struck a match in the dark. And when he cried, quiet, embarrassed, relieved, I didn't laugh. I sat beside him and talked until his shaking stopped. After that, he kept showing up. For lessons. For conversation. For dinner, when he admitted he couldn't cook and hated the bland food he kept forcing down. He paid me for my time at first, far more than I asked for. I tried to refuse. He smiled and said, "I'm not paying for language. I'm paying to not feel invisible." So I took it. Because I was done pretending I didn't need money. Because safety costs something. And I decided I deserved it. 3 months later, Ethan told me he was in love with me. He didn't say it like a demand. He said it like a truth. Like something he was offering with open hands, not a chain. I didn't pretend to be shocked. The way he looked at me made it obvious. I thought about it carefully. Then I told him we could try. Because I wasn't scared of love anymore. Not the healthy kind. And because for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of leaving if it stopped being good. But it didn't stop being good. Somehow, it got better. He praised me constantly, my work, my patience, my resilience, the way I rebuilt myself from ash. At first, it made me flinch. I wasn't used to being seen that way. Then, slowly, it became the air I breathed. Not intoxicating. Just normal. We married quietly. No banquet. No performance. Just promises spoken in a small room, hands held tight, a future that felt like mine. A month later, I found out I was pregnant. I was still getting used to the word when Barry walked into my world like a storm. It happened outside my building after work. Ethan had his hand on my elbow, careful in that overly attentive way first-time husbands have when they're terrified their wife will break. "Relax," I told him, smiling. "It's only a month. I'm fine." Then the air changed. That strange pressure you feel when someone is staring at you too hard. I looked up. And there he was. Barry. Suit perfect. Hair perfect. Face beautiful in that cold, polished way that used to make my heart race. Now it just looked distant. Wrong. Like a photograph from someone else's life. His eyes locked on me, sharp and dark and disbelieving. "Arya," he said, voice rough. "So it really is you." Ethan stepped forward immediately, moving between us without even thinking. His body was tense, protective. "Who are you?" he demanded. "What do you want with my wife?" "My wife." The words landed like a final nail being hammered into a coffin. Barry's face twisted. "Wife?" he repeated, like the concept was obscene. Then he looked at me, eyes bloodshot around the edges. "How long have we been apart? And you already?" I met his gaze calmly. "If I didn't get married," I said, voice flat, "was I supposed to stay loyal to a ghost?" Ethan let out a sharp laugh. "So you're the ex," he said, eyes gleaming with contempt. "The one who treated her like trash and now wants to act like a tragic hero?" Barry's gaze snapped to him, murderous. "This has nothing to do with you," he growled. "Enough," I said, tired in a way that felt ancient. I looked at Barry. "You came all this way? Fine. Let's talk." I led Barry to a nearby cafe. I told Ethan to wait outside. Ethan didn't want to, but he listened, because he respected me. Because he didn't need to control every inch of my world to feel secure in it. Barry sat across from me, shoulders stiff, hands clenched around his cup like he might crush it. His voice was hoarse. "Scarlet and I. There was never anything," he said immediately, like he'd rehearsed it. "Her family helped my family once, when we were close to losing everything. My father asked me to mentor her, to keep her afloat. That's all it was." I stared at him. He took my silence as permission to keep going. "You marrying him," Barry said, jaw tight, "I can pretend it didn't happen. Just leave him. We can go back. We can fix this." I blinked. Then I laughed. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a small, disbelieving breath. Go back? I repeated. His eyes sharpened. Yes. He leaned forward, desperation cracking his polished composure. And the baby, he added, voice lowering. If you handle it now, we can start over clean. My stomach turned. Not because I was shocked. Because I realized, all over again, who he really was. Someone who only loved what he could arrange. Control. Convenience. Ownership. I set my cup down carefully. We can't go back, I said quietly. Because I don't care anymore. His face fractured. What? He whispered, like the word physically hurt. You don't understand, he insisted, voice rising. You loved me. You used to. You mean when I glued the broken cup back together? I interrupted softly. When I waited up all night. When I stitched myself into the shape you wanted. His throat bobbed. He started. I looked out the window. Ethan was still there, watching the door like a guard dog, anxious and protective. And then I smiled, genuinely. Barry followed my gaze. When he saw Ethan, something dark flashed in his eyes. What does he have, Barry hissed, that made you throw away 7 years? I thought about it for a moment. Then I answered honestly. He gives me a lot, I said. More than I can count. Barry's face tightened, like he was bracing. I continued, voice steady. But the most important thing is simple. He stared, waiting. He praises me, I said. He respects me. He doesn't treat me like a cage he can lock and unlock whenever he feels like it. Barry looked stunned. That's it? He said, like he couldn't comprehend it. That's why? Yes, I said, and I didn't flinch. Because I spent years starving in a house full of food, Barry. You can't understand what a kind word feels like when you've only ever used words as weapons. His hand reached across the table suddenly, grabbing my wrist. Arya, he pleaded. I can do that too. I can. Ethan slapped the cafe window from outside so hard it startled people at nearby tables. His mouth formed silent words. Don't touch her. I pulled my wrist free calmly. You can't, I said. Barry's voice turned sharp. You haven't even tried. How do you know? Because you're the kind of man who would rather destroy my exit than watch me walk out. Because you're the kind of man who would rather scare me into obedience than earn my love. Because you're the kind of man who thinks money equals ownership. I met his eyes. Because I know what you did, I said. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked sick. What? What are you talking about? I smiled without warmth. My parents, I said. Your little arrangement with them. The lies. The pressure. The way you cut off every road except the one that led back to you. Barry's lips parted. No sound came out. I lifted my hand, the ring glittering under the cafe lights. My father didn't take this ring because you told him not to, I said. You wanted it on my finger so I'd remember who owned me. You wanted me to believe I couldn't live without you. Barry's eyes glistened. He looked like he wanted to deny it. But he couldn't. Because I'd heard the truth with my own ears. I leaned forward slightly. I loved you, I said quietly. But love doesn't mean I stop being a person. It doesn't mean I become your accessory. And you never treated me like a partner. His mouth trembled. Finally, he whispered, I'm sorry. 3 words. Too late. I stood. Goodbye, Barry, I said. And I meant it. After that day, he left. He didn't apologize again. He didn't beg in the street. He didn't cause a scene. Maybe he realized he'd already lost. Maybe he finally understood that control isn't the same thing as love. Life settled again. Months passed. Our baby was born. At the small celebration we hosted, nothing fancy, just friends, warm food, laughter that didn't feel forced, a package arrived with foreign postage. No return address. Inside was a delicate silver charm, tiny, carefully made, the kind people back home used to give babies for safety. There was also a letter. I didn't need to read much to know what it was. A version of Barry that existed only in regret. A version of him who wanted to rewrite the story from the end and pretend the middle never happened. Ethan was holding our baby nearby, rocking gently, humming under his breath. I stared at the silver charm in my palm. Then I walked to the fireplace. I dropped the charm in. Then the letter. The flames caught quickly, curling the paper into black petals. Ethan looked up, eyebrows raised. I met his eyes and smiled. Just old ghosts, I said softly. He nodded, like he understood. Behind me, the fire crackled, steady, warm, alive. And as the last of the paper turned to ash, I felt something inside me finally settle into place. Not vengeance. Not bitterness. Freedom. From that day on, love and hate stopped battling in my chest. They didn't need to. Because one of them had already died. And the other one had finally learned how to breathe.